last years of the 19th century, that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this Earth with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us.
Broadcasting live
from a tiny studio somewhere in North America.
This is Dark Matters Radio Live. And now I give you your host,
the silverback of ufology.
Here's Don Ecker.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Dark Matters Radio, which, by the way, is brought to you exclusively by KGRA Radio. And I got a jam-packed show for you tonight. But before I start there, got a little story to tell you real quickly. The night before last, which would have been December 2nd, I believe, I went to bed and it was still the 21st century. So yesterday morning, about 5:30, my wife wakes me up. I come bouncing out of a sound sleep. I'm looking around. What's wrong? She said, they shut our power off. And sure as God made little green apples, there was not a spark of electricity to be had. Now, this has happened a number of times. I am sure if you don't live in the sunny paradise of California, well, you've probably heard about the rolling blackouts, but this state is so squirrely that they've been spending gazillions of dollars on things like wind power and solar power, which incidentally, neither of those technologies are ready for prime time. And they've been shutting down our fossil fuel plants like coal-fired and natural gas. Well, that leaves us on the sticky, brown, smelly end of the stick, and it happened yesterday. Now, of course, your host was smart enough quite a while ago to buy himself a generator, and that's what we were doing all day long yesterday, running that thing, keeping our refrigerator powered up and what have you. I got to tell you, it's an exciting adventure. Every day, you never know what's going to happen next. Oh, yeah, by the way, we also have wildlife, abundant wildlife. As it turns out, somebody down the road from us the other day was going outside, heard this snorting sound, and suddenly somebody's cat ended up in a bear's jaws, right down a stone's throw from my hacienda. I thought I was going to have to dig out my old black powder buffalo gun, but fortunately, the bear took off. Oh, yeah, it's exciting. Now, for excitement tonight, because it's been a bit, I brought back my buddy Kevin D. Randle, retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Armed Forces, UFO researcher extraordinaire. If you heard about Roswell, you heard about Randle. And Kevin, as always, it's exciting to have you back. How have you been, my friend?
Not as well as could be expected. It's been a lousy year.
No.
I mean, first we have the derecho. I mean, the pandemic. Then we have the derecho, which wiped out the city. And then we have an election that apparently is cockeyed. And I don't know what more can
Well, that's one way of saying it. Cockeyed. Yeah, cockeyed. Or you could say thieving. You could say fraud. You could say Well, the fix is in, but okay, keep going.
I just thought I'd try to be a little bit neutral. But
you know what they say about middle of the roaders, bud? They're coming at you and going past you, and eventually you're going to get run over.
I know, but I'm worried about the coming civil war.
Well,
and if the president pulls us out of his hip pocket through legal maneuvering, which he's welcome to do, we're going to have big trouble. And
well, it's going to be exciting. 2020 was a washout, and 3 weeks from today as we do this show, it's Christmas. 3 weeks minus 1 day, it's Christmas Eve. So what I would suggest, go out and buy a bottle of your favorite adult beverage. Get all comfy in front of your TV. If you got a fireplace, fire it up. Have a drink or two and say, well, I can't say what I would normally say. Just say, screw it.
But I don't have to go out to buy the adult beverage. I have a untapped source of Beam's Choice, so I can tap into that.
Okay, well, you're fixed up then. You're fixed up. Now, I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the other day when I called Mr. Randle up, I said, hey, look, I've been wanting to get you back. This is before we lost power. I said, I've been wanting to get you back on the show. What do you say? A busy Friday? Well, Don, I've got a 3-minute segment on Coast to Coast every week. And this week it's on Friday. Oh, well, what time? Midnight. I said, hey, bud. I said, you're good. You're good. So I basically shamed him into coming. So here he is.
I don't think that's quite right. But
my interpretation, Kevin. By
the way, tonight at around 12:20 Central Standard Time, 11:20 Mountain, 10:20 your time, I will be doing my segment on Coast to Coast. So tune in.
There you go. There you go.
Since you brought
it up, talking about?
Well, I was going to talk about the photograph that were sort of breaking news, a Navy photo, and I'm going to talk about the trends in ufology, how we started out with one shape and we've kind of morphed into more triangles, and how the occupants started out as wearing spacesuits and we've morphed into something else there as well. So, but I don't have a lot of time to cover it, so I put more information on my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com so you can read about it in depth.
Okay, over the years, I've interviewed you countless times, okay? I couldn't begin to count how many times I've had you on my various radio shows. Now, in all those interviews, you know what I've never asked you, Kevin?
How far is up?
Nope, never asked you that either. But what I've never asked you was how in the world did you end up banging around this field? I've never heard that story. So, I figured tonight would be a great time to hear. How in the hell did you get into this mess?
Oh, man, what an amateur question to ask. Well,
I'm entitled. I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm entitled.
I always blame my mother. She took me to a movie, and I hesitate to say what it is because it was so long ago, Earth versus the Flying Saucers. And that kind of sparked the interest. In high school, I read a book by Brad Steiger called Strangers from the Sky. I'd always had an interest in it prior to that. There's the Lonnie Zamora thing that went on in '64. So I'd always been interested in UFOs. My mother had an interest in science fiction. And science fiction deals with alien visitation and alien civilizations and interstellar flight. And UFOs deal with alien civilizations and alien visitation and interstellar flight. So it wasn't a large step from science fiction into UFOs. So that kind of sparked the interest. But the one thing that I always wanted to know, because in the very beginning, a long time ago, the The Air Force explanation, well, they're just seeing blobs of light in the sky or fuzzy things in the sky. There's no definition to them. And a friend of mine's mother had seen a UFO when she was living on a farm in South Dakota growing up. And the only question I really wanted to ask her was, were the edges sharply defined? Did you see it clearly? And her answer was, of course. When she told me it was about 200 feet over the barn, she got a very good look at it for several minutes. So it wasn't one of these things where you catch something out of the corner of your eye and you're not sure exactly what you'd seen type thing. And that kind of cemented the idea that what I was being told by the various authorities wasn't quite true. It wasn't just fuzzy lights at night. It was something more definitive, something more important. And I had a friend, Eric Novotny, as a matter of fact, who was also interested in UFOs. And so we studied it together. We started an organization we call the Office of Scientific Investigation, which, of course, is a name lifted out of a science fiction movie. And we did UFO investigations. We both were members of the Denver UFO Society, which I understand is still operating. And I think it's the oldest continuous organization in the world. It's, of course, nothing like MUFON or some of the other organizations. It was just sort of a local group. And we would meet, I think it was on the third Friday of the month. We would meet down in off Colfax Avenue on the other side of Denver. So we would have presentations there, and we had a lot of fun. So that kind of cemented it. But I always wanted to write science fiction books. That was my goal, write science fiction. And but breaking into the field, I was trying to write basically anything. I wrote science fiction short stories and never managed to sell a one. And I wrote a article about UFOs and sent it off. And the publisher wrote back and said, there's too much stuff that you used in this thing that's already publicized. Can you do something else? And I thought, well, yeah, if you're asking me to write an article for you, sure, I'll do that. And I wrote the article, and I talked to Coral Lorenzen. I knew Coral Lorenzen, and she'd sent me some information, and I put it together. And in 3 paragraphs, I mentioned some physical evidence. Like page 7, I mentioned it briefly. And they wrote back and said, well, this doesn't quite work for us. Can you do something with the physical evidence? And so eventually I got the article sold. It was called Mysterious Clues Mysterious Clues Left Behind by UFOs, and appeared in Saga's UFO Report. And this was a time where they were just starting a bunch of UFO magazines. Saga had done Saga Magazine, which was a men's magazine, not like Playboy or Penthouse, but a magazine that catered to men with stories about combat, stories about exposés and things like that. And they usually did a UFO article. And so I'd sent it to them, and they were starting the UFO Report. So that article made it into the UFO Report. And,
I'm very, very familiar with that magazine. There were actually a number of them. Another one was True Magazine.
Argosy.
God only knows. But look, this question is kind of a follow-on to how you first got involved. And the reason I'm asking it is because after you give me whatever answer you're going to give me, I want to do a follow-on with that. But when you first began seriously investigating this field, what was your thought processes, Kevin, on what these things were? Because when I was a kid, back in the early 60s, early to mid 60s, I used to read Frank Edwards and some Kehoe and, basically anything I could get my hands on. And at that point, I was convinced that what we were encountering were, in fact, extraterrestrial visitors, people or beings coming here from off-world. Now, did you start out that way also?
Absolutely. As I said, Brad Steiger kind of influenced my thinking on that. John Keel, in some of his writings, kind of influenced my thinking before he went off into a different direction. I had met Don Kehoe at one point, and as I said, I had sent letters to both NICAP and APRO asking some questions, and NICAP responded with a membership kit, and APRO sent an answer to my question along with a membership kit. So I joined APRO because they responded to me personally without some kind of pre-canned join our organization thing. And but I was thoroughly convinced that the UFOs were alien spacecraft, and it would just be a matter of time before we'd be able to prove it, not realizing that we would be working against the government wanting to keep all of this secret. And it was about the same time that the University of Colorado, and I lived in Denver, and the University of Colorado got the contract to investigate UFOs. And I know Eric and I were excited about it coming to Denver, but then, of course, I graduated from high school and had no choice but to go into the Army. Because if I didn't, they were going to draft me, and if they draft you, they put you where they want you, and if you joined it, you could pick a school. So I joined the Army, and but even during flight school, I went out on investigations, and the one that really kind of cracks me up while I was at Fort Walters, Texas, which is Mineral Wells, which is just west of Fort Worth. A fellow named Carol Wayne Watts made the news with his story of being, well, not abducted, but a contactee. And so I wrote a letter. You could get a 3-day pass from the flight school if you had a good reason. So I said, well, my parents are coming to visit me. I'd like a 3-day pass. And they said, okay. And I went to interview Carol Wayne Watts on his contact story. And I still have the tape, as a matter of fact. So I was doing, at that point, I was moving into the arena where I was doing more serious UFO investigation. I still had in my mind it was extraterrestrial, and there was no question about that. I think Watts talked to me because I had a sticker on my car from the base, from the Fort Walters. And he was very, very kind, and we sat down, and he chatted with me for an hour, and then I went back to Fort Walters. And when we got to Fort Rucker, I know we went to visit Joan Wittenauer, who worked with Brad Steiger, and I don't know how we found out where she lived. I went down with a friend, actually a couple of friends, Fred Becker being one of them, to investigate that and talk to her about her experiences and that sort of thing. So I was well immersed in it by the time I got to flight school, but I was thoroughly convinced I was extraterrestrial. When Blue Book files were released publicly, I was one of the first, if not the first civilian, to actually get into them when they were released publicly. And I say that because another friend of mine, Robert Cornett, and I went to Maxwell Air Force Base. The files had been sent to Maxwell Air Force Base, to the Air Force Archives. And it hadn't been announced publicly that they were available, but there had been a circular that came out. It went to the ROTC detachments, and I was taking Air Force ROTC at the time at the University of Iowa, and it said, the Project Blue Book files are available. So I called my editor, who rarely called me back, and I would wait all day for a phone call, and I called him, and of course the secretary said, well, he's not available, can I take a message? And I said, yeah, tell him I can get the Project Blue Book files. I can get into them. Within minutes, the senior editor called me back, the big guy. And he's talking to me about, well, we want you to look for this, and we want you to look for that, and see if you can find out this. And I said to him at the time, well, I assume I've got the assignment. And he said, yes, just don't spend too much money. So Bob Cord and I went down to Maxwell Air Force Base and spent a week going through the files. And as I studied that information, it seemed to suggest that the Air Force had done a very good job on their investigation, that there were answers to the questions, and it didn't seem as likely that it was extraterrestrial anymore. But as I delved deeper into it and saw what was really going on, then I kind of came back to the extraterrestrial. The point where I am at right now is I lean toward the extraterrestrial, but I haven't seen the evidence that would convince me. I mean, we don't have the kind of evidence I'd like to see. And I know what the problem is. The problem is there's been a lot of people manipulating the data so that we don't get a clear-cut answer. And every time a good case comes along, there's always somebody there willing to throw mud on the wall. I think of Philip Klass, for example, coming up with cockamamie explanations for UFO sightings and an awful lot of people glomming onto those, or the Air Force saying Roswell was this Project Mogul balloon, this highly classified thing, and that's why we had to cover it up. And yet the evidence doesn't lead us to Project Mogul, because there was no flight on the day that the balloon had to be launched for it to fall on the Brazil Ranch. So there's no good terrestrial explanation for Roswell at the moment. Doesn't mean there isn't one hiding out there somewhere. Just means we don't have a good explanation.
Yeah, and not to mention, Kevin, that Jesse Marcel, all right, who at the time was the base intelligence officer, a World War II veteran, as he said, and as a matter of fact, just recently I saw excerpts from an interview conducted with Marcel. He was basically familiar with all aircraft then currently flying, and he seemed to me pretty adamant that whatever it was that he stumbled over, well, he just did not have a prosaic explanation for it. And you got to give the guy credit. I do. He was the intelligence officer of the only nuclear weapons military organization anywhere on planet Earth at that time. And the guy couldn't have been a schlub to have that job. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I will say this, had Jesse Marcel been the lone voice, then his story isn't quite as exciting as it became, because we found other people who were involved in the cover-up. People that did not come forward and say, yes, I was there and I saw this, that, and the other thing. People we went out and had to talk to, had to chase down, had to convince to talk to us. So he's not the lone voice. But when you get down to the bottom, all you have is the testimony. And that's what's troubling to me. I would like something more. I would like documents. We can't find a diary anybody wrote at the time that said something about retrieving the materials, a letter to a family member, any kind of documentation. We have not been able to find that, and we've looked for 30 years for that sort of thing.
Well, there may be a couple of reasons why that is. Back in 1947, as you are very well aware, we were living in a different world then. People instinctively trusted the government, trusted the American government, the American military, the American intelligence services, because, hey, they were Americans. I just fought World War II on their behalf, and by God, I know they're out there for my benefit and my welfare and my family's welfare. But that wasn't entirely true. And they, if you believe some of the testimony that people like you and Don Schmidt and Stanton Friedman over the years have collected, that there were people that apparently were threatened with premeditated murder. And one of them, of course, was a kid at the time, Frankie Rowe. That testimony has always stuck with me. There was that. Then there was also...
Let me say one thing about Frankie Rowe, because I was the first one to talk to her. Very sincere lady, very, very frightened. We had to work very hard to get her to talk to us. I say us, Don Schmidt and me, in the beginning, because she was worried about ramifications. So whatever was said to her back in 1947 by the representatives of the military frightened her enough that 30 years later, she was extremely frightened about talking about it. So she's a very, very good witness, was a very good witness. She passed away, I think, last year. But the point simply is this: it's still testimony. And there's got to be some documentation somewhere, and we just have not been able to find it.
Well, I wanted to mention that at one point before his death, I interviewed Congressman Stephen Schiff, who was the congressional representative from Roswell, from that area. And when Schiff got involved in that investigation, going to the GAO, by law, that military organization had to have all of their records available for review. and 3 years of communications and other records mysteriously disappeared from the 509th. Now, Kevin, I got to tell you, pal, that told me tons and tons and tons of information without anybody saying a word to me. That material was removed and destroyed for who knows why.
Well, I can tell you, as an intelligence officer and having a safe with lots of classified material in it, we routinely destroyed a lot of things. There was documentation. If it was secret or above, we had to detail the name of the title of the document we destroyed and who was there to destroy it, and it had to take 2 of us to destroy it. We couldn't do it by ourselves. I never destroyed any top secrets. The top secret was even more stringent than that. Confidential, you could pretty well burn up. Nobody really cared.
Well, hold that thought, because we've got to take a break, and we're going to pick up there when we come back. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dark Matters Radio. Tonight, I have as my guest Kevin D. Randle, very well-known UFO researcher, writer, author, and authority. And we've got a lot more coming up, so stick around.
A birthday without her mom, an anniversary without her husband, her wedding day without her dad. These are the days when military families feel it most of all. The loss of their soldier, their sailor, their airman, their Marine, their Coast Guardsman. Families never forget their loved ones lost to war or illness or suicide. Families never forget, and neither do we. We are TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. We provide resources, support, and comfort to heal the hearts and meet the needs of grieving military families, all at no cost to them. Your generosity can make an enormous difference in the lives of the families of our fallen military heroes. Our military families need to know they are not alone and they are not forgotten. Show them your support at TAPS.org.
I'm getting older and noticing that my body just doesn't work as well as it used to. So I like to keep fit as possible by hitting the gym a few times a week. Recently, I started having a nagging bicep pain, and it got so bad I couldn't even lift the weights. When I was complaining about it to a friend, he told me about angioprim. He said chelation helps remove toxins, heavy metals, and cholesterol in veins and arteries that may cause blockages. You know, after just 1 week of taking angioprim, the pain was gone, and now I'm back in the gym full strength. Scientific research proves the active ingredient in angioprim has superior oral chelation action that helps promote cardiovascular health. So to learn more, go to angioprim.com. That's ANGIOPRIM.com, or talk to a trained consultant. Call Angioprim toll free at 945-882-7221. You'll feel better with more energy. That's 945-882-7221. Or go to the website angioprim.com.
Folks, this is very important information. What's to be said about CBD? AncientLifeOil.com. Our CBD is made from hemp and has 0.003 THC, which means this wonderful product won't get you high, no matter what amount you take. What does CBD do for the body? My hands are tied. But you can Google CBD benefits and be astounded. When you're finished reading, you'll want to log on to AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com and purchase. Life is good when you feel good. People are tired of pain. People are asking for non-GMO organic products to help them with, you fill in the blank. Legal in 49 states, and again, our CBD is made from hemp. Ancient Life Oil is about helping people one by one by one. If you wonder how good the product is, the CEO takes it every day without miss. AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com. Have a great day.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRARadio.com.
And we are back with Mr. Kevin Randle right here on Dark Matters Radio. And of course, DMR is courtesy of KGRA Radio, your contact point to the paranormal and some other weird places. Kevin, I had to break into your soliloquy there about Roswell and the intelligence thing. You had a bit more to say about that, didn't you?
Well, the thing is, I'm not sure that there's a great deal of significance to the destruction of the material, because it happens all the time. We would get a CIA fact book every 6 months. There's an unclassified version and a classified version, and every 6 months we'd have to destroy the old one. So we destroyed things regularly, and you have to do it because you just don't have the space. The message.
Yeah, but as you just told me, you said there's a world of difference between confidential material and top secret material. Now,
absolutely.
For the sake of argument, for the sake of this discussion, had the Roswell item, whatever that item was, been an extraterrestrial craft, that would have been beyond top secret, wouldn't it?
I would say so, but the thing you have to remember is the way the questions were phrased was they were asking agencies for any information that they had that dealt with the Roswell case. And I think by the time those questions were asked, most of the agencies that would have had any information like that had sent it on elsewhere. They didn't have any. They answered the questions honestly. We don't have anything relating to this because they didn't. It went elsewhere. But there was a great deal of manipulation going on behind the scenes. I interviewed Richard Weaver for 2 hours on my radio show. And if you go to my blog, you can just type in Richard Weaver and it'll bring up both the hours of the show. And the point is, Weaver was telling me about the manipulation that went on behind the scenes, trying to get this thing done with Congressman Schiff, who was the New Mexico congressman. And I'm not going to mention any names about who manipulated the data, Carl Flock, but it looked like the real purpose of this, and Schiff wasn't involved in that kind of aspect, but the real purpose in this manipulation was to create a market for a book about the Roswell case and trying to get some sort of a endorsement, if you will, from the Air Force by forcing them to answer some questions about the Roswell crash. But the investigation was really a search for documents, and the way it was conducted sort of suggested it was going to have negative results, so that they weren't going to find anything. So the documentation is probably still out there somewhere. It's just that the Air Force, for the most part, well, Weaver said that Weaver said when I was talking to him that he really wanted to find an alien spacecraft, because if he could do that, his name would go down in history. And he's absolutely correct. But as they got into it, and I think they ran into some stone walls, and they ran into this nonsense of the cover story as well. And when they got when all was said and done, all they came up with was Project Mogul. And to give Weaver his due, we know a lot about what Project Mogul was doing in New Mexico in 1947 because he found the notes, he found the documents, and he published all of that stuff in their big, thick report so we could review it and see what was going on. So when they say flight number 4 was the culprit for Roswell, we can say, well, according to the documentation, there was no flight number 4. It didn't fly. It was canceled. And how do you get around that one? They say, well, Project Mogul was so highly classified, nobody in New Mexico even knew the name. The name Mogul appears in Carreri's diary 3 times at least that I found. What was going on in New Mexico was an attempt to create a constant level balloon, a balloon that would remain at a specific altitude in what they thought was an acoustical level in the atmosphere where sound would travel a great distance. And they could pick up the sound of the detonations of the Soviets attempting to detonating atomic bombs, doing their atomic research. And of course, spy planes and everything else put that to rest. They didn't need that anymore. It was sort of a stopgap measure. The purpose to spy on the Soviets was highly classified. What was going on in New Mexico, nobody cared about. In fact, on July 10th, 2 days later, after the story came out in the Roswell Daily Record about them having a flying saucer, pictures of a mogul array were in the newspapers around the country. And I know it was a mogul array because Charles Moore, who was working on the mogul project in New Mexico at the time, told me that you see the ladder in one of the pictures. He says, I bought that ladder with petty cash down in Alamogordo. So, the whole Air Force investigation just didn't really go the way it should have.
Okay, now, June 24th of 47 is when Ken Arnold had his infamous sighting by Mount Rainier. And the 4th of July of 47 is associated with the Roswell incident. Do we know exactly what date it was, Kevin, when the Roswell incident happened?
We don't know what date it fell. What we have is Dan Wilmot, who lived in Roswell in 1947, obviously, had seen an object on July 2nd. Frank Kaufman told it was July 4th. And Frank Kaufman, of course, has since been proven not to be a credible source. What we do know is that Jesse Marcel came back to Roswell late on the evening of July 7th, and the next morning briefed Colonel Blanchard on what they had found, and that was when the press release went out. The press release went out on the afternoon of July 8th. We don't. That's all we really know.
Now, Sheridan Cabot was with Marcel, correct?
Well, let me explain one thing about Cabot. Don and I interviewed him a number of times, and he denied he was ever involved. He didn't do it. They were too busy with their work at the CIC to be involved in anything like this. Marcel said that he went out there. When Weaver interviewed him, Cabot said, yes, I went out there. I recognized it immediately as a balloon. I don't know why he didn't bother communicating this rather important bit of intelligence to Marcel, why he didn't mention it to Blanchard, but he never did, and the story got out from that point. If it was a balloon, could have ended the whole thing in July of 1947. So we had Cabot lying about it, but yeah, Cabot went out there with Marcel. And there were other things that Cabot said and did when Don and I interviewed him that suggested he knew more than he was going to ever tell us. And he was a little annoyed at Bill Rickett for telling us as much as he had told us. And he tried to misdirect us by saying the guy named Darden was the provost marshal in Roswell in July of 1947, but it was really Edwin Easley. Darden took over for Easley when Easley left sometime later, but Easley was the guy there on the ground in July of 1947. So we have all of that sort of thing, but pinning down the date, we know, based on what Bill Brazel told us, the son of the man, the field where the debris was found was almost a watering station for the sheep. And he said that his father was there almost every day. Sometimes it would be a day or two, but at least every other day he was there. So we can say that in the days prior to July 8th, Brazel found the debris, took it into Roswell. We can narrow it down that way, that sometime around July 4th is when the thing fell, but we don't know for certain.
Okay, well now, Cabot sounded to me like the epitome of a Cold War warrior. Would you agree with that assessment? Yeah. I had to process that for a moment, but yeah, I would think so. I was going to say he was the ultimate intelligence officer, not giving out anything that he didn't have to give out. When I was serving with the Air Force as an intelligence officer at Richards Gebar, I got a call one day from the Kansas City Star, I think it was. A reporter had some questions, and they wanted to talk to the intelligence officer, and I was the guy on the ground at the time there. And he had information about some event, and I don't remember what it was. It was so long ago. And he wanted me to verify the information, and I wouldn't do it.
because I knew the information from classified sources. I couldn't verify it. If I verified the information, he knew he had the information right, and I said, yes, that's right. I'm in trouble for verifying the information, and I would show up in the story. Well, according to the intelligence officer, Richard Guauer, this story is true. And so I just denied everything, and he just yelled and screamed at me and called me dumb, and I'm thinking, not as dumb as you think I am. So I never gave him the verification. But I mean, you had to look at the information that you had. If you got it from classified sources, you had to be careful about what you said and whom you said it to. If you got it from unclassified sources, then you could say that. While serving in Iraq, I had what I called my open source intelligence, which was a satellite feed from the various news networks. And I could watch the news as it was being broadcast in the United States from CBS, ABC, NBC, and I think we had Fox News, and I think we had CNN. So we could get a variety of news, and we would know what was going on. And the one that really annoyed me was Tom What's-His-Face from Nightline was in Baghdad. And he's doing this big, long story about the destruction of the Baghdad schools. And he's showing this school he's got film of this school where there's raw sewage bubbling up on the playground. And I'm looking at that, and I said, we've fixed 2,500 schools in Iraq. And this clown, Tom Gerald, and this clown finds the one we haven't gotten to. And that's the story. Not all the good things we've done, not the 2,500 schools we fixed. I've got pictures of us handing out school supplies to Iraqi children in a school that we repaired, our battalion repaired or helped to repair. And Tom Gerald's there going, well, here's the things going on in Iraq. And I'm thinking, why don't you talk about the good stuff?
Well, because if it bleeds, it leads, Kevin. That's simple.
There was no bleeding going on. It was just this one school we hadn't got
metaphorically bleeding. It was bleeding sewage.
And the other thing that annoyed me is some of the bad guys, the terrorists, fired rockets at a hotel and didn't do any real damage. But what was hilarious is they had brought the rockets in, and the launcher they used, the mobile unit they used to launch it, was a donkey. And we thought, where's PETA complaining about this? This donkey was injured in the firing of these rockets. Why aren't you not outraged about that?
Yeah. Well, it's a strange world we inhabit today. Several years ago, one morning, I was up having my usual coffee at the table, and Vicky wandered out. She generally sleeps a little later than I do. And we're sitting there, and I had just heard the latest outrage on the radio, and I don't even know what it was anymore. And I told her, and this was kind of a half-joking manner, but I said, when was it that we went to bed and we woke up in another dimension? And I was just kidding about that. But, today I'm not so sure about that, Kevin. I'm not so sure. We might have oozed into another dimension.
Would it be a dimension of sight or sound?
Either or.
Is there a signpost up ahead?
Yes. Take your pick.
Well, this is part of the interest to the Twilight Zone, I'm sure you knew that.
Of course.
I was just telling the audience who may not be up on the Twilight Zone introductions by Rod Serling that didn't realize what I was referencing there.
Yeah, it's been a while. Recently, speaking of the Twilight Zone, I was looking for something to watch one night on Netflix. And, of course, the Twilight Zone is up there, all the seasons. And I said, what the hey, I'm going to check this out because I've seen them all in the past. I mean, it's been on since, 1959 or 58 when it started. So I'm watching, and here's Rod Serling getting ready to introduce a story. And he's standing there looking so cool, and, his hair's slicked back, and he's in his suit, and he's smoking a cigarette. And I kind of laughed and I said, "Oh my, have times changed or what?"
Oh yeah, yeah.
Have times changed.
Well, the good episode for the Twilight Zone, the one that I remember, is "To Serve Man," and there was a creature from another world lands on Earth and goes to the United Nations, and they provide us with ways to end war and vaccines for every disease you could imagine,
and feed everybody too,
and feed, yes, everything. And he leaves his book at the UN, and so the government is trying to decode the book, read the book, and they finally get the title called "To Serve Man," and they think, well, that's just absolutely great. And the leader of the code breakers is getting on the spaceship to travel to the other world, because there's been this big interchange of people. And his assistant runs up, and as he's getting on board the craft, she says, "The book, To Serve Man, it's a cookbook."
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, that was quite shocking at the time. There was another episode that, and I'll never forget this, because I was just a young kid then, and I think the show was on, the Twilight Zone, I think, was on like Friday evenings.
Early
at least
Friday evenings.
Yeah, at least when I remember this episode. And there was one where this astronaut had taken off and he crash landed on some planet. How he get out of the solar system? You see, now back in those days, they didn't think that people would ask inconvenient questions like, how did you get to another inhabited planet or whatever? But anyway, he crashed his ship. He's able to cobble his radio back together, and he gets a few transmissions off to Earth, and Earth is in the process of going to nuclear war. Now, the astronaut, I think it was Richard Basehart, and the actor Richard Basehart. And at any rate, finally, he loses all contact with Earth. He's on this planet all by himself, and he discovers a woman there who turns out to be an alien woman. All right.
No, Don, I have to interrupt you. She turns out to be a witch. It was Elizabeth Montgomery.
No.
You missed,
that was not the actress.
Joke. You missed the joke. It was
Charles Bronson. Charles Bronson did one with Elizabeth Montgomery, another Twilight Zone.
That could be true. That could be right. I stand corrected. I'm sorry I interrupted you. I'll just shut up.
How do I know all this crap? Okay.
Yeah.
How do I know this? Well, that tells you where my mind was 50 years ago. Well, anyway, okay, this woman, all right, they finally end up being able to rudimentary communicate with each other. And it turns out his first name is Adam. And she identified herself as her first name, Eve. And they're on planet Earth. Now, I'll never forget this. Now, of course, I was just a kid then, and I had heard of Adam and Eve. I knew who that was. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, boy, this is from the Bible. Well, my father had been watching this, and he looked over at my mom, and he said, oh, boy, I wonder how the church is going to accept this one. Oh, and that always stuck with me. It was funny, but it always stuck with me. Well, enough of the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're right. It was Charles Bronson and Elizabeth Montgomery. So my joke
didn't translate that well. But hey, that's okay, Kevin. We're gonna cut you a huss on that one. So you got another book coming out in a few months, huh?
I had one just come out called The Best of Project Blue Book, which was an examination of some of the Project Blue Book files with the perspective of we can look back at the files and put in the information that they didn't have access to back then. And the new book coming out is called UFOs in the Deep State. And it looks at the manipulation behind the scenes of the UFO data and how we've been lied to about what was going on in the field of the UFO since 1947, actually.
Well, now let me do a shitty on you. How's the process coming?
The what?
The process. Is everything running smoothly with your new book?
Actually, it's going much smoother than it was the last time we chatted 2 days ago. I sent the letter, the email that I told you that I was going to send, that the book was awash in red ink, and there were so many changes I wasn't sure what to do about that. And after we chatted, I got an email back from one of the senior people there and says, "Hold on." And just this morning, I got a retransmission of the book, and it's not a wash in a sea of red anymore. It's actually something that I can deal with. I can look for the mistakes that has been introduced by the editor. And the one I told you about, I mentioned that I had received the Bronze Star Medal for my service in Iraq. And in the bio of me, the editor even changed that to the Bronze Star. And I said, no, it's the Bronze Star Medal. It's not a Bronze Star, it's the Bronze Star Medal. Get the name right. So I'd sent that to them, and they said, hey, I got the thing back this morning, and a lot of it's much easier to deal with now than it was Thursday when we chatted, or Wednesday when we chatted.
Okay. Oh, well,
had it not been fixed, I would have been still outraged about it. I was so outraged with this publisher at one time, a number of years ago in a book. I told him that the editorial process was the worst experience I'd ever had. I included trips to the hospital and a tour in Vietnam in that. And thought I would never hear from him again. And suddenly, out of the blue, several years ago, I got a letter from him, and they said, "We hear you're doing a book about blah, blah, blah. We'd like to take a look at it." And I'm thinking, yeah, okay, you want to send me money for doing a book? I'm on board. And the processes have been much smoother until we ran into this little hiccup, but the hiccup has been resolved. So
now, should we mention why this hiccup occurred?
Well, we had an editor. I'm not sure exactly. She had mentioned, and I say, yeah, I think it's a woman, had mentioned that as she was going through the book, she dealt with some of the gender issues. And I'm thinking, gender issues? What the hell does that mean? I haven't found anything that suggests she manipulated the gender to more neutral terms, using they for the singular. You know, my attitude is, if I'm talking about a male, I'm going to use he. If I'm talking about a female, I'm going to talk about she. And if I'm talking about a group, I'm going to use they. Because I've read stories where they have used they and theirs as the pronouns, and it becomes so confusing when you're talking about a single person, and you start talking about they, and it becomes very confusing. So purity of language.
It's called a woke culture, Kevin.
Well, I know that, but I'm just saying, I just haven't found anything in there, and I haven't gotten very deep into it. I've scanned the whole thing, and I've just done the introduction and one chapter in depth, read the whole thing this afternoon, as a matter of fact, those two things. And I haven't found anything where that sort of thing has reared its ugly head. I have had to correct a couple of things, like she said that Kenneth Arnold had coined the phrase "flying saucer," and I had to fix that, so it proved that I knew that it wasn't that he hadn't coined the phrase. He had merely described an object like a saucer skipping across the pond, and the news media sort of put the flying saucer thing together.
Right, right.
Because I didn't want people to think that that's what I thought. A couple of little things like that. She took out the NCOIC for Rickett being, well, as you well know, the non-commissioned officer in charge. She made him the senior sergeant in the CIC office. And I'm thinking, that's true. He was the senior sergeant. So I kind of let that one slide because I just didn't want to get into the problem of having to deal with NCOIC again.
I was one of those once upon a time, and when we were getting ready to be overrun again 3 days after we got overrun. And I was picked to be an NCOIC. And let me tell you what, when I think about that period of my life, you know what I associate it with? This is going to sound racist, but a Chinese fire drill. Okay.
Well, I often say that I was at one point the company commander because I was a senior surviving officer. But that's kind of a misnomer because even though we'd taken some casualties, we were evacuating the aircraft off to the airfield. And the pilot that came out to fly with me, my co-pilot, he crawled up and checked the tail rotor, which I had done earlier in the day. But when he got up there and checked it, the linkage fell apart in his hand, so we couldn't fly. So we were left behind, and I was the senior officer. And that meant simply I'd been in Vietnam longer than anybody else who was remaining on the in our company. So I sort of was nominated to be the company commander for 8 or 10 hours until we got the aircraft back. But it sounds better to say I was the senior surviving officer.
Well, it sounds, did you ever get the chopper out of there?
Oh, no, this was on our airfield. And
no, did you ever, were you able to save it?
The maintenance people fixed it the next day.
Oh, okay.
It was just that we were going to take off in like 30 minutes, and there was no way they could fix it that quickly. So that aircraft and my crew remained behind, and there were a lot of non-flying people in the company who remained behind. We were just getting the aircraft the hell out of there.
I got you. Well, you know what? We are at the top of the hour, which means we've got to take that top of the hour break. My guest tonight, Kevin Randle, who is, well, tonight he's been quite the rock-on tour. You're a rock-on tour, Kevin. And
why the hell not?
We've got another hour coming up when we get back, so stick around. This is Dark Matters Radio. And the entity bringing it all to you, KGRA. We'll be back.
Please listen. Now is not the time to fear. When your immune system is strong, shields up. You have very little worries. If your immune system is compromised, you're susceptible to all viruses. I say shields up and no fear. Try Heart Love from GetTheTea.com. Heart Love has a special ingredient called allicin. It comes from the healing part of the garlic plant. No garlic breath, no garlic leaking out your pores, just pure immune-building ingredients that gets your shields up. Heart Love is a unique blend of herbs that loves to build you up. Google garlic and know the benefits. One Heart Love pill is equal to 20 cloves of garlic. 20 cloves! Shields up. You've heard of our Life Change Cleansing Tea at GetTheTea.com. Now try Heart Love. And by the way, take your blood pressure and watch weekly what happens. So here's how to purchase. Log on to GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. And build your shields. That's GetTheTea.com. Mention Ray in the coupon code and hit apply and receive free shipping.
When you're in the house for longer periods of time, you can see them flying or running across the floor. Ooh, yuck. They're unhealthy, gross, and disgusting. Bugs. I loathe bugs. We keep a clean home, but occasionally bugs show up. Well, I found something that is tougher than bugs. Orange Guard. On contact, it kills hidden bugs, including ants, roaches, and fleas. Plus, Orange Guard is a residual repellent. All of the ingredients of Orange Guard are on the FDA generally recognized as safe list. Orange Guard may be used around food, humans, and pets. It comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Orange Guard. Available at orangeguard.com, Whole Foods, and Ace Hardware.
The Liberator Rocket Heater will heat your home for free. The highly efficient Liberator Rocket Heater has no moving parts. It's safe and strong, constructed of 1/4-inch steel. So like all things made in the USA, it's built to last. Uses any kind of wood, sticks, even scrap in its gravity-fed firebox. And it heats workshops, homes, garages, outbuildings, industrial areas, and barns. Watch the video of this blast furnace stove in action. Visit RocketHeater.com. That's RocketHeater.com.
for the thousands of wounded warriors returning from battle? Wounded Warrior Project has developed the Warriors to Work program, a career counseling service that helps wounded warriors translate their military experience to a civilian job. These extraordinary men and women bring more than just teamwork and inspiration to the workplace. They bring proven world-class job skills. And to ensure proper placement, Wounded Warrior Project works with employers to find just the right job fit. Talented, skilled, and eager to get back to work, you have the opportunity to hire a seasoned veteran. Contact Wounded Warrior Project at findwwp.org. Welcome home the brave.
You listen to us, and we listen to you. And so does the CIA. KGRARadio.com.
And here we are with hour number 2 with Mr. Kevin Randle. Kevin, it's 3 weeks from today that it will be Christmas Day. And 3 weeks minus 1 day, it'll be Christmas Eve. Do you got anything exciting planned in this lockdown culture that we're in?
Well, since they've said that we have to wear masks in the house now, and I don't want to bring a tree into the house because, good God, who knows where that's been. No, we really have no plans. I think we'll do the same things that we've done for literally 45 years on Christmas Eve, and watch the Christmas Story with Darren McGavin before he became Carl Kolchak.
Yes. Well, actually, it was after he was Carl Kolchak.
Well, no, see, but Christmas Story takes place in the 30s, and he was Carl Kolchak in the 70s. So I based it on the television chronology. Ah,
okay. All right.
Because I could.
Yeah, well, you're onto something there. Oh my God, did I love that? Did I love that movie? Now, speaking about a Christmas movie, a new one came out that I just recently watched with Mel Gibson as, are you ready for this? Santa Claus, and Walton Goggins. You ready for this? As the hitman assigned to take out Santa. The name of the movie, Fat Man. Oh, yeah, it's a dark, dark comedy. But, boy, I'll tell you what, if you watch that movie, I can honestly place a bet. I'll bet you $10 you've never seen a movie quite like this one. Have you heard about it?
No, I haven't, but I would say this before we go any further. Mel Brooks could never have made Blazing Saddles in today's environment.
Oh, no, never. Never. Oh, I think you boys all had enough beans there. Oh, God, yes, that was a great that was a great movie.
Or the line, "The sheriff is near." Which everybody who's seen the movie knows exactly what I'm saying here. The sheriff is near.
Yes, that's true. Well, hey, now this is a great place to take a short segue. Kevin, I propose that America today in 2020, almost 2021, has forgotten how to laugh. That's my proposition. What do you say?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. We can't tell a joke without somebody getting offended. No matter how innocuous the joke might be, somebody gets offended. You just can't say anything. Oh, you're fat shaming. You're misogynistic. You're racist. You're a pig. You smell bad. You just can't say anything to anybody anymore. And I've seen how touchy people have gotten. Things that I think of as just so bland, they become outraged about. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now,
what do you attribute it to?
I'm going to blame the news media.
Okay, all right.
And the reason I say that is because they're working so hard to magnify the divides among us. You know, we've got to reduce everything to a way of marginalizing one group or praising another group, and creating this attitude that we should all be at each other's throats when we really should be working together, especially in this environment.
Well, you probably in many ways are right. I also believe that a lot of this emanates from higher education. Okay, the political correctness infection that has infected by now the entire damn country. But I think a great deal of it has emanated from centers of so-called higher learning.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure a whole lot of higher learning is going on. When you get into an environment where you can't even question somebody because you've offended them now, you can't ask them a question about their sources. Where did that information come from? How did you get that information? How do I verify that information? They become offended at you. How dare you not listen to me? And I think the best example of this is, and I'm going to say it right out flat, the nonsense of climate change, that we somehow have affected climate change. When they were doing the election cycles here in Iowa, the first in the nation caucuses, what's Iowa going to do? I emailed a number of the Democratic candidates and asked them what they were going to do about the Milankovitch cycles, which may be a contributor to global warming. They had no clue what I was talking about, but they all made the same kind of platitude. Well, climate change is very important to the candidate. Well, if the candidate is so important to the candidate, how come he doesn't know what the Milankovitch cycles are? And this is the idea that the Earth's orbit changes from oval shape to more circular and out again over a period of 100,000 years, and the axis of the Earth changes 2 or 3 degrees over the period of 25,000 years. It's a cycle that goes on, and these things contribute to the warming and the cooling of the globe. Maybe not as significantly as what we see, but it's certainly contributing to it. But they had no idea about it. How are you going to fight climate change if you don't understand even the basics of how the Earth warms and cools?
Well, that's an excellent point. And one thing that I always think about, actually, there are a couple of items within this one thing, but roughly 11, 12,000 years ago, something happened which caused the massive ice sheets that covered half of what today is North America suddenly dissipated in a geologically extraordinarily short time, which caused the oceans to rise anywhere from 1 to 200 feet higher than what they had been. Drastic climate change all across the planet. And to my knowledge, Kevin, there weren't too many SUVs out there at that point. Have you ever thought about that?
Oh, absolutely. I thought about when I was in college taking an astronomy course, and I remember the instructor talking about how the climate in Europe had warmed up in the 17th century, 16th century, and it expanded the area they could farm in. It moved it further north, and the growing season was longer and allowed them to prosper quite a bit. So we've gone through these cycles, and nobody ever talks about the cycles, how cyclic the nature of global warming and cooling is. We've been in a mini ice age at one point in the 19th century, and we've come out of that, and we're beginning to warm up. But almost every prediction they've made about the catastrophe of global warming hasn't happened, and it probably isn't going to happen.
It's
and
pure
if you say
pablum.
that, how dare you
recall,
say this?
You were there. Do you recall in the latter 70s when the flavor of the week was we were entering another ice age? Do you recall that?
Absolutely. I remember that precisely. And I remember going to play softball in the 80s in the evening, and the clocks, the bank's temperature gauges, thermometers, for the lack of a better term, would say it's like 104 degrees. I don't know the last time when we've hit 100 degrees here in Iowa, or in where I live in Iowa. And so we're a little bit cooler than we were back in the 80s. But that's just weather. That's not climate. Well, yeah, it is climate. But the point simply is, if you dare talk about this, you're a climate denier. How dare you talk about this? Why, there was this symposium they held, and 11,000 scientists agreed. The 97% of the scientists there agreed that the climate was warming. I'm thinking, if I went to a UFO convention and polled the people about them being extraterrestrial, 97% of the people would say, yeah, they're extraterrestrial. And all I've done is preach to the crowd, the choir. I have not done a proper survey. So it's, you don't dare say this stuff, and you're going to be hammered into the ground for saying it. And I've decided to say it because I don't care anymore.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, this is the other little nugget of information that many people do not take into account, and that is the fact that our planet is approximately, give or take, 4.5 billion with a B years old. Now, in that 4.5 billion with a B years, there's been a hell of a lot of climate change, a hell of a lot, and very, very little of it, Kevin, what I suggest was humankind caused.
Well, at one point, the Earth was a big snowball. I mean, it was completely covered with ice and snow, and of course, the sunlight coming down was reflected back into space, so it didn't warm up significantly until there was some kind of an event that caused the ice to melt, the snow to melt, and the planet began to warm. And it's warmed up, it's cooled off, it's warmed up, it's cooled off. I mean, was it 13,000 years ago? I think it was. We're in the middle of an ice age.
Yeah, when that event happened, whatever it was, and the Younger Dryas period began.
Yeah, absolutely. But I often think that what caused the Earth to warm up to significantly was the coming of the flying saucers.
Yeah, and solar flares. I mean, every once in a while, the sun gets, our star, Sol, gets a little antsy, and she begins throwing out flashes and rays and heats, and who knows. Hey, but I did get a couple of questions from our chat lounge. Let me go there real quick. Ronald of ERRT Radio today asked, Kevin, as a nuts and bolts specialist, do you think these UFO craft are physical?
That's the theory I work on. I've been a nuts and bolts guy from the beginning. I think if we're having alien visitation, it's nuts and bolts. I know, and I do not deny that there's a possibility that there may be some kind of interdimensional thing going on here that may not require nuts and bolts craft. I know that, in my favorite theory, and I say that with great trepidation because people say, Randle thinks they're time travelers. No, I think it's a wonderful, fun theory. I don't think it's right, but I think it's a wonderful, fun theory. It's a possibility they're time travelers, and that changes the whole complexion of what we're talking about. I believe that if there's alien visitation, it's interstellar, and they're coming from another solar system. And I understand the vast distances that you have to cross to get here from there, wherever there may be, and the problems with defeating those kinds of things, getting a craft that can travel those distances, and how do they do it, and that sort of thing. I don't know, but I'm basically kind of a nuts and bolts guy.
Well, I have three possibilities in my little book of theory. Nuts and bolts, of course, and that's my go-to. That's all the way back when I first became interested in this. But And I was going to mention this earlier when I asked you if you believed originally, when you first started this journey, that we're talking about actual physical beings traveling here from another star. And has your thinking changed on that? Well, my thinking has a bit. The interdimensional possibilities, and, there are, well, it's tentative at best, but there are regions where this seems to be happening with some regularity, i.e. Skinwalker Ranch, if some of the stories can be believed. That is my possibility. But the last one, and this is one that I don't really go into much, Kevin, is the possibility that at some point in our past, Earth's past, there were a group of highly technologically developed humans that foresaw some type of catastrophic event about to happen. They left the planet. They had the capability to leave the planet, and later may have returned, and they are today the hidden among us. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about that, or even if you would give any credence to that. But that, in many ways, I find most fascinating, if there's anything at all to suggest that.
Well, I've taken that in kind of a different direction and thought about that as well, but that the beings weren't necessarily human. They were some other intelligent species and got the heck out of Dodge.
That originated here on Earth?
Yeah, another intelligent species that originated here on Earth millions of years ago and took off for whatever reason. I've also always kind of speculated, had a fun theory that the reason the dinosaurs went extinct is they were hunted into oblivion by that intelligent species, and they wiped out their food source, so they had to go somewhere else and find it, or they died out as well. But after 100 million years, or 65 million years, whatever number you want to put on it, what's going to be left of that civilization that we could find and understand?
Well, yeah, in the past, I've watched some theoretical presentations of what would happen if suddenly our entire civilization were to vanish overnight. How long would it take for our structures, our buildings, our automobiles, how long would they last until they return to the earth that provided the original materials? And that's quite a thought journey, quite a thought experiment. But it wouldn't, in geologically speaking, it would be no time at all, and everything would be gone with very little to suggest we were ever here, with the possible exception of nuclear reactors.
Oh, I was going to say with the possible exception of those damn plastic straws that everybody hates.
Or plastic bags.
But, you look at the high civilizations of Mesoamerica, the Olmec and the Maya. They abandoned their cities, they left, and we can still find traces of that, but that's only 1,500 years. So we know that the structures can last a while, but at some point, there's really going to be nothing left for us to find. And
what would be there in 50,000 years, Kevin?
Oh, I was thinking more of 1,000,000 years, but who knows what would be left? I mean, we found some. Well, I used to study something called out of place artifacts.
OOPArt, sure.
Or what we called oops, out of place things, because I thought that was a funnier name for it, which are supposedly millions of years old. And I'm not sure how good all of that methodology is for dating some of these things. But that would be the kind of thing you'd expect once in a long time. Very rarely would you find anything that you could suggest might have been created much over 100,000 years ago. I don't think you'd find anything at all that was older than that. So there's some real problems with.
Well, I take it you've obviously read Forbidden Archaeology, written by authors Michael Cremo and Dr. Richard L. Thompson, huh?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, that was when I went to college. My major was anthropology, and I dabbled in archaeology. I remember going to see Chariots of the Gods, the movie, not because I was interested in von Daniken's theories. I was more interested in seeing the places on the big screen, you know, when he's hanging around in Central America looking at the places we're studying, and that sort of thing was much more exciting than some of his cockamamie theories. But yeah, you look at all of that stuff, and I think as we grow older, we apply a more rigorous standard to that, because I know originally I was just fascinated by Chariots of the Gods, and then I began asking questions that really didn't get good answers. So, you know, you kind of back away from some of that stuff. You know, was if aliens were here helping us build the pyramids, why didn't they have a much better metallurgy? Because you can't fly interstellar distances in a stone flying saucer. You need metallurgy and some other things like that to make it happen. So even if you're kind of playing the gods, why aren't there better indications in some of the ancient civilizations that they were interacting with an intelligent race that had metallurgy or some of the other things that we take for granted today?
I've got another question, but before I go to it, let me ask you this. And this is in the basket of theory and speculation. Okay. Now, it's a mainstay of science fiction, which I think you and I are both great fans of. The idea of creating a device that would allow a human being to travel through time. Now, if such a device were ever to be created, and if time travelers would ever actually utilize this device, many of those questions about what went on 3,000, 4,000, 6,000 years ago, perhaps even 15,000 years ago, might be answered. Do you think that this is ever within the realm of possibility from all the research, the investigation, and what have you have conducted?
Well, I would say that we're traveling through time right now, and we know based on NASA studies and something like that, that the astronauts do travel through time at a very slow pace. I mean, they do not age as quickly as we do here on Earth because they're accelerated to higher speeds, but the difference is very, very minute. So we can travel into the future, and there may be a way of traveling into the future. The question is, can you get back? And that's the question I think we cannot answer. I don't think we can get back. I think it's a one-way trip, as it is with us just traveling at our normal speed through time. We cannot go back. There are all kinds of things that suggest it's not happening. Other than the fact that if there were time travelers, where are they? We expect something to happen. And yes, I've seen all the stories about the people who supposedly traveled in time and all of that stuff. I just don't accept any of them. In fact, Brad Steiger told me he was very disappointed in Al Bielek, who with the Philadelphia experiment, and claimed he traveled some thousands of years into the future and came back. And Brad being the nice guy that he was, always kind of believed what he said until he learned that the guy was lying to him, and he was very, very depressed to learn that Al Bielek had been lying to him. But I don't think you can get back. I think it's a one-way trip. And what happens if you come back? Do you create an alternate timeline? Do you screw up our civilization in some fashion you don't see? I did a series of books with Bob Cornett, which we call the Time Mercenaries, where they went back to win the Battle of the Alamo. so that the Texans could get the massive oil fields found in northern Mexico. This was a number of years ago. And they were successful in getting back and winning the Battle of the Alamo, but that screwed up time. And the next thing they had to go back to Gettysburg to make sure that the Confederacy didn't win at Gettysburg. And then they had to go back in time to make sure that Custer didn't win at the Little Bighorn. They had to keep repairing the damage they had done. And each time they tried to repair the damage, they made something else worse. And so I just don't think that time travel into the past is theoretically possible, but time travel into the future, I think, is certainly possible.
Very interesting. Okay, this question comes from John Ostanes, who says, Ted Phillips passed away this year after being out of the spotlight for many years. He did several excellent DMR shows. Do Don or Dr. Randle have any comments on his contributions to the field and how he left with unfinished research into Marley Woods?
I think that all of us are going to leave with unfinished research. His studies of landing trace cases and stuff is just extremely significant because it suggests a predictability. And by that, I mean, he used to say that if you told him the shape of the landing gear, tripod, or however it was arranged, he could tell you what the craft looked like. That suggests a predictability, and that suggests something that is real. His contributions were amazing. I don't know what where he was going in Marley Woods, what he was doing. A number of years ago, Robert Cornett and I went to Joplin, Missouri to check out the spook light, and we were able to discover exactly what it was. All the people in Joplin were mad at us, and they said, well, people have come and studied it for years and years, and they've never figured it out. And it turns out that actually all those other studies, they did figure it out. Nobody wanted to hear it. I do not know of any explanation that Ted Phillips found for Marley Woods. I don't know what. I saw him lecture about it a number of years ago. It was an interesting thing. I don't think it had anything to do really with the UFOs, but it did have to do with these anomalous.
It aligned with allegedly with Skinwalker Ranch, where entities would show up and disappear, etc.
Yeah, I was going to say phenomenon, but entities works just as well almost. So I don't know, but I think his contribution to the field was extremely significant. He was one of the few people that didn't get involved in all these little nasty knife fights that seem to go on in the field. I found myself caught up in another one. I waded into the swamp. It's my own fault. Over Nick Pope and Nick Redfern and Philip Mantle and David Clark, about whether Nick Pope really investigated UFOs for the Ministry of Defense in Great Britain. And it's just one of those nasty little fights that break out in ufology all the time.
Well, yeah, I unfortunately some time ago made some less than stellar remarks about a certain American in the UK who was involved with the Bentwaters case, whether this guy was let me see if I can clean this up a bit, as full of blueberries as blueberry muffins, are supposed to be. And I shouldn't mention his name, Larry Warren, but after I did.
I was going to say, are his initials Larry Warren?
And suddenly, for a couple of weeks, I was snowballed on Facebook with many ignorant and derogatory remarks directed at me, which I decided initially I'm just going to ignore them and maybe it'll go away. And eventually they did. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. What were your conclusions about Pope?
I think he embellished his resume from the documentation.
No, say it ain't true, Joe.
It ain't true. And from his own
You still there, Kevin? Oh, my heavens. Bill,
You
I
have
think...
lost.
Oh,
Are you there?
He's back.
I'm
Okay.
back. What I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted by the internet, the documentation from his own lips seemed to suggest that his job was just to take the information over the phone, and if it needed further investigation, it passed on to a different organization. I think he kind of embellished his role in that and has been running with it since that time. So this stuff is up on my blog. First, the article I did after I communicated with Nick Pope when this thing blew up last week, I thought, well, nobody's asked Nick Pope. So I emailed Nick Pope, and he provided some information, and I put a blog posting together. And then Mantle and Redfern and Clark all emailed me and said, here's some other documentation. And I looked at all of that and put up another one Nick Pope revisited. So my whole, I guess, opinion has been put on my blog. So if you want, and they're just, they're recent postings, so you can find them very easily. But if you want to look at that, it, I think, suggests where we are at that. I'm going to do another one here as soon as I get a little bit of time, because I have the documentation. I'm going to put some of the documents up there so people can look at the documents and see that we're just not throwing snowballs at Nick Pope willy-nilly, that there is some documentation to back up this idea that his role wasn't quite as important as he made it out to be.
So that just another way of stepping into it, huh?
Yeah, but I did it on purpose. I stepped in it on purpose, because I thought it only fair to give Nick Pope an opportunity to respond to these allegations, and I hadn't been in depth in looking at the state of British ufology, for crying out loud. And then they provided me with additional information, and I said, they're probably right. He didn't do. He worked on the UFO desk at the Ministry of Defense. He took in the reports. He didn't do any real investigation himself. It wasn't in their budget to do it. If a case warranted further investigation, it went to a different agency. And I mean, we see this all the time. Guys who were clerks in Vietnam telling stories about sneaking out through the wire to hunt down Charlie. And you and I both know that's a load of crap. I mean, you see anybody crawling around the wire, you're going to light them up.
Well, yeah, my wife and I were still publishing UFO magazine. And at the time, now, observe me carefully, Kevin, because I am going to step into it right now.
I didn't want to mention any names, Cliff Stone.
But at the time, William Burns, Bill Burns, the day after Roswell fame, and his wife were involved with the magazine through no acknowledgement per se from me. And Cliff Stone sent this article to the magazine that Burns decided to publish. Well, I read it. Now, just from my own observation, okay, and there was a point in my life where my life depended upon my ability of observing something and then recognizing whether it was a threat, a danger, benign, whatever the case may be. And I had a pretty good bullshit detector. And I read this article where Cliff Stone is talking about slipping through the razor wire to go out and meet his UFO contact in Vietnam. Now, okay, a lot of people that may never have had any military activity in their background, may read that and say, well, this guy was an SFC, a sergeant first class. He's retired. And why would he lie about this? Well, you never met Cliff. Now, I did meet Cliff. As a matter of fact, quite a few times. And back in the late 80s, the very early 90s, I gave him accolade out my ears for his ability to find some really obscure documents in his research. But somewhere along the line, Clifford became an action hero, okay? And the bottom line was, he was not a tall guy. I'm going to guess about what, Kevin? 5'7", 5'8", probably 40 pounds overweight. He smoked cigarettes one after another. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he went through 3 packs a day. That's 60 cigarettes, 20 per pack. And I tried to imagine Cliff. At that point, it would have been roughly 20, 25 years in the past, slipping through the razor wire, dodging Charlie in the NVA while he goes and meets his UFO Pentagon contact. And I looked at Burns and I said, Bill, you're going to publish this? Why, yes. I said, why? This is the biggest load of bullshit I have ever seen. I said, remember, I was in Vietnam. I kind of have a working knowledge how that stuff happened. Well, why don't you write another article, okay, opposing what he had to say? So I did. You read it, didn't you, Kevin?
Oh, absolutely. I actually quote from it in some of the things I've written.
Well, anyway, what do you do with something like that? You can only tell the people what you know. And I have, over the years, I've tried to be as absolutely grounded and downright responsible and as truthful as I know how to be. And that's just the way it is.
Well, I was always worried about it. Cliff Stone spent 22 years in the Army, and he only made it to Sergeant First Class. It kind of worried me as well.
Well, yeah, by all rights, he should have made Master Sergeant E8.
Yeah, he wouldn't make Sergeant Major. He wouldn't have made Sergeant Major, but I was surprised he didn't make Master Sergeant.
Yeah.
But the first time I met him, we were at his house in Roswell, sitting in the living room, and he said, "Oh, just a minute, I have to go out to the car." And he goes out the car and he comes back and he's carrying a folder with a secret cover sheet on it. Goes into his bedroom, and I knew it at that moment that Cliff Stone was a con man, because I think it was a top secret cover sheet. And I'm thinking that top secret requires you to store it in a vault. You can't leave it in your car, and I was sure he didn't have a vault in that room to store it. So, I mean, that was just for show for the dummies who didn't know how those things worked. And so we listened to what he had to say, and most of what he said was crapola. Yeah, unbelievable. But I don't think he was the brightest bulb in the display.
Well, no, and this isn't a show to bang on anybody in particular, but back about 1991 at UFO Magazine, I fielded a call from Cliff. Now, at that time, I did not know him well. I knew him, but not well. And I answered the phone, and the conversation went like this. Don, yeah, you're not going to believe what just happened to me. I had to call somebody up and tell them. Okay, what's this about, Cliff? Well, I was at my house and this car pulled up. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I swear to God, this is the God's truth. Okay, no embellishment, nothing else. This is just the way it happened. And this car pulled up and 3 guys got out, and 1 or 2 of them walked up to me standing beside my door. I said, okay. And? Well, the guy said, come on, I want to take you for a ride and show you something. And I said, did you know these guys? No. Well, who were they? I don't know. Now, okay, let's just stop there for a moment. Now, if somebody pulled up to my house that I didn't know and came up to me, I'm standing outside, and said, "Come on, Don, get your jacket. I'm taking you for a ride. I want to show you something." Well, Bubba, you can bet I'm going to have a hell of a lot of questions. And am I going to get in the car? Oh, no. Well, Cliff, I said, "What'd you do?" "I went inside and got my jacket." "Okay." "And I slipped my .357 Magnum into my pocket." Okay, now I could feel my bullshit alarm beginning to jangle. And these guys, he claimed, took him out into the desert. He's Roswell, right? I mean, there's a lot of open space around there. And they pulled off the road and got out. And the guy got out and he said, "Cliff, I know you brought your gun." And I'm listening to this, okay, and I'm starting to really shake my head like I don't believe I'm hearing this. "Now, Cliff, I want you to pull your gun out and I want you to shoot me." Now, he's telling me this, okay? Now, there's nobody more, prone to calling bullshit than me when I hear bullshit. So I asked him, what the hell could I do? I said, "Oh, what'd you do?" "Well, I pulled my gun out and I fired." I said, "You pulled your gun out and you fired at this guy?" "Yes." Now I know he's out of his freaking mind. And I said, "Well, what happened?" "Nothing. He just stood there." I said, "Did you have your weapon loaded with real ammunition, live ammunition?" "Yes." "Hollow points." Now I said, "Okay, Cliff. Well, look, buddy, we're on deadline. I really got to go. You take care." And I hung up. And Kevin, that's when I knew there was something not firing on all 6 cylinders. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. And Cliff seems to be a nice enough fellow, but I don't know how many people he convinced. Well, he's convinced a lot of people, I guess, with his stories, who aren't, I guess, involved with critical thinking whatsoever. I just he would tell stories that he'd get a call in the middle of the night, and they would go out he'd go out and meet these people, and they'd draw weapons at him, and they'd point them at him, and they'd threaten him with all these sorts of things, and then he'd go home. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's exactly what I would do. I wouldn't call the FBI or anybody. I just go on. Well,
this is something over the years, Kevin. Now, this is probably a great place to mention this. I've been around for 30 plus years in this field. You've been around even longer. And I've noticed a phenomenon in this field that people are infected, or some people have the propensity to be infected by the UFO virus, where their initial story might be, I was out walking my dog, and lo and behold, this crazy looking saucer-like thing flew over my head and stopped in the sky, and I watched it for like maybe 5 minutes, and then suddenly it took off. Well, over time, that becomes a bit more, shall we say, exciting and maybe embellished, where not only did it fly over my head, but it landed and 2 guys got out and they talked to me. And then later on, they came back and they took me for a ride. You see what I'm saying, right?
Oh, absolutely. You've got to keep escalating the story to keep people interested in it.
Do you think that's what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the flaws when you're writing a book or something like, be it fiction or nonfiction. They keep escalating the danger to the point where, your family's in danger. Well, the neighborhood's in danger. The city's in danger. And you keep escalating the danger level to keep people interested in the book. And I think people realize that telling the story, I saw a flying saucer across the sky and nothing happened. Well, that's interesting today. What happens tomorrow? And people, I've heard that story. I don't want to hear it again. And I think that's what you have to do to keep it going. Robert Willingham told a story of being at the crash of a UFO back in originally in 1948, then he moved it to 1950 and then the mid-1950s. But by the time he got done with his tales, he'd been to the scene of 7 UFO crashes. And he said at one point he was driving down the road and a farmer approached him and flagged him down and told him about a flying saucer crash over the hill. I'm thinking, I drive on country roads all the time. No farmer ever flags me down to show me a flying saucer. So, it's just not enough to do the one event. You've got to keep expanding the event to keep people interested.
Well, it's a weird phenomenon that I've found that has happened with many, many, many people over the years. And okay, here's a real quick, dirty example. Bill Cooper. Now, when Cooper first surfaced in July of 1988 on the old Paranet computer bulletin board system, the guy that originated the whole Paranet system, Jim Spicer, was a sysop or systems operator. And Cooper came out with somewhat of a mundane story where he was on board a diesel submarine. I believe it was off the coast of California. He was on lookout, and he saw this gigantic object come out of the ocean, fly up into the clouds, then came back down a while later, or one very much like it, and went back in the water. And that was the end of the story. Well, before it was all said and done, within a year or two, he was privy to all the cosmic secrets of the universe because he worked on the Admiral's briefing team at Pearl Harbor and knew all the skinny, the inside dope on everything from the John F. Kennedy assassination to what really was going on with MJ-12. You were there. You saw it.
Oh, absolutely. And we know exactly what's going on with MJ-12. It's a hoax. There. Send me all the nasty emails and then tell me why it's not a hoax.
I got another question from John Ostanes, and this is a good one. During a recent KGRA show with James Fox about his movie Phenomenon, he described several interviews he did about the Holloman Air Force Base landing video going back to Robert Emenegger's experience. Fox's sources had sent it with some saying it was real and others it was a hoax, including beings exiting the craft. Kevin, do you think it's real? And if so, do you think we ever might see it?
I do not believe it's real. There are too many versions of the story out there to suggest that it's real. And I think Emenegger wasn't there at Holloman. He saw a movie supposedly of it at Air Base in California. Was it Norton Air Force Base, where they had a photographic archive? Supposedly he was there at Norton Air Force Base and saw this movie of the landing at Holloman Air Force Base. But I just don't buy the story at all. And we've heard these kinds of stories before. Jackie Gleason, supposedly good friends of Richard Nixon, and Nixon took him to show him the bodies of the alien creatures. Or Dwight Eisenhower went off to meet the aliens when he really had a dental appointment in California. There's never any way to get a handle on these stories. The sources are nebulous, and it's impossible to chase down the actual facts. And I think that the Holloman landing, which supposedly took place because the Socorro landing, which was 3 or 4 days earlier, they landed in the wrong place. They got off course and landed in Socorro at an open field rather than an Air Force base I was going to say 100 miles south of Socorro. I don't think Alamogordo is that far south. And I don't buy the story. I just don't buy it. I need some more. Don Burlinson, I think, did some work on that in one of the MUFON journals. And I mentioned that on my blog. I did something on my blog about that, or I interviewed Don. Yeah, I talked to Don Burlinson about it, and I did something on my blog that suggested that his research might have had a flaw in it, which is not to say anything bad about Don Burlinson. He's a very good researcher. He just got caught up in some testimony I think is probably not very good.
Well, now to get back momentarily to the Jackie Gleason thing. 20 odd years ago, around the time, it would be over 20 years ago, around the time of the Roswell 50th anniversary, I was invited to do a CNBC interview early in the morning. They had a car come by and pick me up at, 5:30, quarter of 6 a.m. The show that I was on, I think, was on at 7 or 7:30 Pacific time. And also on the show was Jackie Gleason's widow. Now, I had a chance to chat with her briefly. And I knew about the claims that had been made about Gleason and Nixon. And as she told me, she said, well, they were golfing buddies. He had been down in Florida. Of course, Gleason spent a lot of time in Florida. He had a beautiful home in upstate New York, shaped like a flying saucer, as a matter of fact. The nickname of his home was the Mothership. And he always had a fascination with UFOs and alleged ET visitation. Well, she said when he came back from that trip where he was with his buddy Nixon, he was literally, now not that this proves anything, but she said he came home, he was bouncing off the walls, and he couldn't shut up about what his buddy Dick Nixon had shown him, the bodies of aliens that had been picked up in a UFO crash. And he was like that for weeks. Now, does that prove anything? No, but I found it to be a very interesting story. Do I believe it? I'm not sure. But initially, I can say that I don't disbelieve it by what the woman told me. Now, I got another question. This is from another of our esteemed chat lounge users, Libertas. And he says, I am of the opinion when the government leaks information and uses the term threat, they're looking for more money. Do you think the recent leaks are for more funding, Kevin?
No, I don't think so. The leaks may have a different purpose, and some of the leakers have a monetary stake in those leaks. And I'm thinking of the To the Stars Academy. There's a financial motivation for those sorts of leaks or those alleged leaks there, and I think that might be what's going on. I can understand that the military would suggest threats to increase their budgets, increase their manpower. But I think some of the leaks that we see in the UFO field aren't designed to enhance their financial situation.
Well, Kevin, we're down to just roughly a touch over a minute left. We've got to close up shop just a couple of minutes early tonight because of some other programming KGRA is doing. So what do you have any final words to leave with us?
I'm going to do a bit of a rant here. And what annoys me is people who review books anonymously on Amazon. And I know there's a couple of people who rate my books low because they don't like me. And I don't think that's fair. If you're going to review a book, at least have the courtesy to read it. And I know some of these people don't read it. They just write negative reviews for that, just to get, I guess, to harm my sales or harm my reputation. And I think that you owe it to the people who are doing the work to at least be honest in your reviewing of those books. And that's one of the problems we have in today's world, where you can hide behind your keyboard and you can say anything nasty thing you want, and you're pretty much immune from any kind of response from those that you're attacking.
Like a smack in the teeth. Kevin, we are in essence totally out of time. I want to wish you and your family a very, very happy holiday. Please keep in touch. The best wishes go to you. And ladies and gentlemen, that is it for tonight. Next week, I have Mr. Tony Kimmery on. Tony will be bringing a show to KGRA starting sometime in January, to be announced, and it's going to deal with matters of intelligence, civilian, military, you name it. That's it for tonight. God bless. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Good night.